Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Heidi from My Reading Life, and I'm here today to talk to you about my 2017 reading statistics. I've really been enjoying watching everybody else wrap up their reading year, their 2017 reading year, all the stats videos, all the best of videos, best fiction, best nonfiction, all of the things. I have been loving it. My watch later list is out of control. It's still at like 150 videos that I'm behind, but I don't want to miss anybody's end of the year videos. I just find them to be so interesting and I just love watching them. So I thought I would jump in and I would talk to you a little bit about my reading statistics for 2017, and let's just get to it. So overall, I read 131 books for the year in 2017, and that was up from 108 in 2016. So that was a pretty big jump. I don't set a set number of books that I want to read in any particular year, but because I've been tracking my reading for so long, I know in general I'm going to read somewhere between 100 and 140 or so books every year. And it just depends on what else is going on in that year. It depends on what kinds of books I get interested in. I have always been a mood reader. I read by whim most of the time, and so I can get into certain topics for a long time and just read on those topics. And so I've never really set myself a particular number of a goal. I just like to read, and so it's not important to me how many books I read. But I do keep track of it just for the interest. I do like to know. So 131 total, and that breaks down into 31,556 pages. This is the first year that I've ever tracked pages read. And the pages read reflects only physical books or ebooks that I've read. Obviously doesn't reflect audiobooks, which I consume through my ears and not through my eyes. So 31,556 pages in the physical or ebooks that I read last year. So I'm going to be interested in 2018. I'm going to continue to track the pages read to see, how that changes year to year. I think that will be interesting. So the longest book I read in the past year was Mad Ship by Robin Hobb in her Live Ship Traders trilogy, and that book was 850 pages long. So that was the longest book I read. In some years, I've read longer books. Certainly I read War and Peace one year. I read Don Quixote one year. So I can, I am interested to read longer books if they happen to be the books that I pick up. But 850 is still a pretty big chunkster, so that's cool. And then the shortest book that I read was On Tyranny by Timothy Snyder, which logged in at 86 pages, and that was a nonfiction book about fascism and tyranny and how what's happened over the 20th century sort of reflects on what's happening today. So the breakdown of those books that I read, the 131 books I read, 66% of those were fiction and 34% were nonfiction, which I am pretty pleased with. I feel that my nonfiction reading definitely increased in 2017. I'm hoping that that continues in 2018. Definitely Nonfiction November really boosted my numbers and has sort of launched me off into this nonfiction kick, which I have yet to emerge from, and I'm really loving it. So I don't see that changing in 2018. If anything, I'm hoping that percentage increases. And then I also track the source of the books that I read over the year. So that means, is it mine? Did it come from the library? Or was it borrowed or lent to me by a friend? And in 2017, 78% of the books that I read were mine, which is great because it gets me to read these books behind me, which are on my physical TBR or on my ebook TBR. And I would like to reduce the amount of these physical books that I have in my possession that I have not read. 18% of the books that I read were from the library, and 4% of the books that I read were borrowed or lent to me by friends and family. I have to stop myself from borrowing more from the library. I am seriously like a magpie or a crow. When I go into the library, there's so many interesting books that I'd like to read, and I'm just like, oh, I want to read that, I want to read that, I want to read that. And I have to literally stop myself and say, Heidi, are you going to be able to read that in the amount of time that you can borrow it? It does help that the library that I choose to use. I have a library in my town that is small, but I choose to use a library in a neighboring town, which is 20 minutes away, and it's in the opposite direction from the direction that I travel to and from to work. So I have to plan my trips to the library, which is actually good because it limits the amount of books. It limits the amount of time that I go to the library, and therefore limits the amount of books that I borrow from the library. Because, like I said before, want to get to these books. So if I'm borrowing them from the library, I'm not getting to these guys back here. I do also use my library's online services, so I will borrow ebooks and audiobooks from my library, and I love that service. I would probably borrow way more from that, but they don't always have the books that I'm looking for. I usually go and search in their database before I buy any new books. And a lot of times the newer books they don't have yet in our library's online system. So, you know, I can't always depend on being able to get what I want through that system. I also track the type of book that I read, and when I say type, I mean hardcover, paperback, ebook, or audiobook. And I read in 2017, 44% of the books that I read were paperback, 24% were audiobook, 16% were hardcover, and 16% were ebook. And I have found my audiobook reading has increased over the last few years because my current job, I drive a lot, so I spend several hours a week just driving to and from places that I have to go to work, so that's a lot of audiobook listening time. I listen to a lot of podcasts too, but I definitely have increased my audiobook listening because of my current job. I also have a 45-minute each way commute every day, so that's an hour and a half of time to listen to audiobooks, which I actually really like. I know a lot of people dislike their commutes, but I don't live in a very populated area, so my commutes are just the distance that I have to drive. It's not because I'm in traffic, and I find that commute time is me time. It's my time to sort of decompress and relax from the day, or to sort of get myself awake and ready for work in the morning. So I actually really like my commute in terms of adding more reading time or more podcast listening time to my life. So that's really increased my audiobook listening. And then I have found that I greatly prefer to read in paperback over hardback, only because the weight of the hardcovers sometimes bothers me, hurts my hands if I read for a long time. Also, hardcovers are hard to take with you when you're going places. They don't easily fit in your bag or whatever, so I prefer paperback for that reason. And for some reason, I'm not really sure, my ebook reading has really decreased over the last few months. I find it hard to stay focused when I'm ebook reading. And I have a regular Kindle. I have the Kindle app on my iPad and my cell phone. I really don't like reading on my cell phone. My cell phone is too small. I have the iPhone 5, so my screen's fairly small. And as I get older, I just don't like dealing with trying to read on my phone. So I don't mind reading on my iPad or my Kindle, but for whatever reason, I do not find myself picking those devices up when it's time to relax and to read. I find myself picking up a physical book. So I'm not sure. I have a lot of good books to be read on my Kindle, so maybe, I don't know, I may have to try to on purpose work in more ebook reading this year. We'll have to see how that goes. I also track diversity in my reading, and by diversity I mean anybody whose life is particularly different from mine as a white American. So that might be race, that might be religion, that might be sexuality. It is not typically gender in terms of male female, but it might be gender in terms of, people that don't identify with the binary male female. It's what I feel is diverse. So it's either an author that's a person of color, or it's an author that has a different sexuality than me, or the main character that has a very different lifestyle than me, typically not white. Although sexuality, again, could be something that I would consider diverse. So it's really subjective to me and what I'm trying to do with my reading, which is to broaden the perspective of the stories that I consume, and to try to get as much different perspective into my life to make me more aware of how other people view and experience the world. So for diversity, 60% of the books that I read I did not consider diverse, but 40% of the books I read I did consider diverse, and that's an increase from the previous year. So I'm really pleased with that number, and I feel like if you look at my top 10 lists, the way that I had broadened my reading is very much reflected in my best books of the year, in that a lot of those books are not books that I would have picked up 5 years ago. Like, I just wouldn't have been aware of them. I wouldn't have had them in my radar. And I'm very intentionally trying to create diversity in my reading because I feel that's making me a better person and a more educated, well-rounded person. I'm not doing it for anybody else's, to meet anybody else's standard, or I'm not trying to force the way I think about it on anybody else, just for myself, just to make me more well-rounded. That's why I've started more intentionally trying to read diversely, and I'm really pleased with how I'm doing so far, and I hope to continue that and make that number even bigger in 2018. And I think I will now, because I think I'm gravitating towards more diverse content and authors, just naturally, because I've found a lot of new authors to love since I've been looking for diversity more intentionally. So I'm really pleased with that. And then the last thing I wanted to mention that I track is gender of the authors of the books that I read. In this past year, 63% of the books I read were written by female authors, 34% were written by male authors, and then 3% were like men and women writing together or whatever. And I think that's fairly normal for me. I tend to gravitate just, if I didn't think about what I was going to read, I would just pick up women authors probably most regularly. I think that's just normal for me to look for. I used to, when I was younger, I read almost exclusively romance novels. So, that's almost like 95% or even more women writers. So I think I just automatically gravitate towards women writers in the books that I read anyway. So I don't think that's going to change much, and I like that. I like a woman's voice most of the time. Not to say that I don't want to read men, but I'm happy with, I don't feel like I need to be 50-50 with the gender. So that's it. That's my 2017 reading year. Those are the stats. Overall, an excellent reading year. I'm really pleased with how everything turned out. I'm pleased with my numbers. I don't think there's anything that I regret or would change. And I look forward to watching more of your videos about 2017 stats and best books and so forth. And I will talk to you later.